My name is Jeff Vomund. I'm a PhD student here at George Mason University. And Motivation Monday, which is what you're at right now, is hosted by the Graduate Student Committee of the AERA's Motivation in Education SIG. We offer this programming kind of as a way to disseminate and share ideas and strategies for conducting educational research. This year, Motivation Monday has been a little different because it's been live. It's been live and synchronous. And the graduate student leadership team have done, I think, a great job they have of organizing this series of synchronous panels and discussions each month. So I think we have at least one more left this year. So we'll plug it at the end. Make sure you can come back, graduate students. So now for our panelists. We do have three really, really wonderful scholars tonight. We're so lucky to have them and so thankful for their generosity. Dr. Kristy Robinson is the Assistant Professor of the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology at McGill University in Montreal, as we were talking about earlier. Her primary lines of inquiry include developmental patterns of motivational constructs, as well as classroom interventions that support students' motivation in identity development. Dr. Robinson's publications show a wide variety of collaboration with other scholars, both within and beyond her university. In the chat, you'll notice we put an example of one of our articles in there. The title is, "You Know What, I Can Do This: Heterogeneous Joint Trajectories of Expectancy for Success and Attainment Value in Chemistry." Wow, I can really see the title. It was great. Thanks, Dr. Robinson. Dr. Bradley Bergey is an assistant professor of educational psychology in the Secondary Education and Youth Services Department at Queens College City University of New York. His primary research interests include student and teacher motivation and self-regulation. Current projects include the study of the career motivations of prospective teachers from underrepresented race ethnic groups in the US teaching workforce and help seeking in college STEM courses. Dr. Bergey has collaborated with peers on scholarly articles addressing student self-regulation at the university level, as well as examining the academic motivations of students who struggle to read. Again, one of his articles that you'll find a link to in the chat is, "Do students' questions during chemistry lectures predict perceived comprehension and exam performance?" Dr. Avi Kaplan is also with us. He is a professor of educational psychology at the College of Education and Human Development at Temple University. His research interests primarily focus on student and teacher motivation and identity development, especially considering the role of the environment in these processes. Dr. Kaplan has been a prolific author and collaborator throughout his academic career. He is the former editor of the Journal of Experimental Education and the current president of Division 15, Educational Psychology, of the American Psychological Association. Dr. Kaplan has given us a few recent publications that might be relevant to us as graduate students. Those will also be put in the chat. One of them is the role of the role of context in educational random controlled trial findings, called the Redefine Evidence-Based Practice. Steps for Applying the Complex Dynamical Systems Approach in Educational Research, a guide for the perplexed scholar. I would be one of those in that regard. And Identity Scholarship in Educational Psychology towards a Complex Dynamic Systems Perspective. So thank you, scholars, for those articles. We really appreciate that as a way to get to know you and get to know some of your work. So Motivation Monday follows from three sections. Section one, or phase one, is a kind of a panelist discussion. So we'll be asking the panelists questions, and they'll be talking kind of with us, but also amongst themselves. And then after they've had a chance to kind of dig into these questions, then we will have a chance as graduate students to kind of ask them particular questions. You can put those in the chat. Somebody will find those, or wait a little bit, but whatever, we will definitely make time to get to your questions. And at the end, we have sort of a collective interactive activity to kind of like on collaborative research that we'll do via Jamboard. So we'll end with that.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. All righty. Thanks, Corey. Panelists, if you're ready, our discussion kind of begins with our trying to understand the key steps in the process of collaborative research. And then it's going to, from there, we're going to go to some specific strategies and approaches that are related to forming effective research collaborations. So these questions are for all you panelists. I arbitrarily thought I'd start with Dr. Robinson, but please, any of you three, feel free to jump in whenever you are ready. So Dr. Robinson, if you're ready, could you share an example with us of some collaborative research from your own career that really worked out well?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for inviting me, first of all. I'm really honored to be here and happy to see everyone. And for sure, want to preface my comments with, I'm early career. I think I'm the early career perspective on the panel here. So, I'm very new to a lot of this too, and I am learning alongside all of you as well. So I have a few things to share that hopefully will be helpful. And I thought of a couple different examples and a couple different directions I could go, but I was trying to think of maybe what Bradley and Avi would share too. So I thought of an example that might be different from what they'll share, that also might be helpful. So I think, so a current collaboration that I have that's ongoing that I started when I just arrived at McGill. I was new, I didn't really know anyone outside my department, but I'm really interested in, students' experiences in STEM courses and how those kind of shape their motivational trajectories. So I thought, wow, I really need some STEM settings to do some research in. I had kind of older projects that were still ongoing, but I really wanted to start something on my own. And of course, when I got to my department, they're like, oh, we have this grant opportunity, you should apply. So you need to have, data sources within the next month or something. I was like, oh my gosh. So I collaborate with STEM faculty at McGill. And I feel like it's worked well so far anyway, in that we've been able to do some fun projects like the one you very kindly posted there. And we've gotten to learn from each other quite a bit. So that actually might be kind of similar to something Avi might share. But that's an example of a project that I feel like has been, is that the question? Just like what it was? Yeah.
That was great. Perfect.
Okay.
You're on it. You're already getting 100%. Drs. Kaplan or Bergey, do you have an example too that you'd like to share with us of your collaboration that's worked out well?
Go ahead, Bradley.
I don't, again, thank you for, like Kristy mentioned, for inviting me. I'm really happy to share what I've learned. I think I'm still in the early career category too. I'm coming up for tenure in a year, so I guess that puts me kind of late early. When I was thinking about collaborations in advance of thinking about talking with everyone, it struck me that when I was looking at like the various collaborations I've had since I started a PhD, to doing a postdoc, to like starting a faculty position, was just how, well, first of all, virtually everything I do is collaborative, unless I worked really hard to carve out some bit that's non-collaborative for purposes of a tenure checklist that I can talk a little bit more about later. But so, and then it struck me just how different all of these collaborations are in the nature of them. So like the collaborations that we start off having, and maybe that you're having now, if you're a PhD candidate, is you're working with a mentor closely. And I think at the time I wasn't even thinking of that as a collaboration. I was being trained, even though later I was told, don't frame that as a collaboration. And then I think what I think of as kind of like my first, I did a postdoc right out of, after I graduated from Temple, working on my PhD there. And that I think I'll use as the example here of like kind of the important successful collaboration. Because in that postdoc, I was walking into a grant that had been running for a couple of years. I collected a bunch of data, and they needed someone to kind of come in with a educational psychology, motivation, self-regulated learning lens, and kind of work with all the data. And so that ended up being very productive because their data was already collected, and the lab was very efficient. So it was set up to kind of allow me to contribute something to a project that was already running. And then the collaborations that come after that as a faculty member are very different in that the hierarchy is now changed, and the collaborations are more about working with other faculty members who are at the same stage as you or maybe more advanced than you. And then those have a very different dynamic. And I can say a little bit more about experiences on those, but that's an initial framing of what I've been thinking about.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Kaplan?
So now I feel very old. And I didn't, when I send you 3 papers, I didn't mean that you put all 3 of them up. I mean, I thought you select one. In any case, so I have, like Bradley, I think that almost everything that I've done has been collaborative. And I had many experiences in collaboration, some of them more successful, some of them less successful. But I think, and I was looking at the titles that both of the articles were both Kristy and Bradley put up, and there's chemistry there. And I didn't put anything in chemistry, so I apologize. But one of the things that I was thinking about, I think about the collaboration as a solution. So if you think about chemistry, like they teach the difference between a solution and whatever it is, the other thing that, doesn't mix, right? So for me, it always has been that collaboration was an opportunity for me and my collaborators to create something that we couldn't do ourselves. So even when I work with my students, and the couple of my students like on this call, thank you folks for coming to support me, that with my students always bring new things so the interaction is always beyond what I could do by myself. And that's my orientations. And this is how I approach collaborations. And I've had some collaborations that continued since graduate school when I collaborated with fellow graduate students, like people that you may know, the literature, like Alan Patrick, that we've intermittently have been writing together. And then collaborating my first position, my first faculty position, I was interested in identity. I didn't know really what I was doing yet, but I brought my motivation perspective. And then there was an identity scholar that we started talking, and then we realized that together we can actually create this synergy. And I've been collaborating with that person until today. It's been 25 years. And then on the call also, we have the fortune to have Joanna Garner on the call, who's a collaborator with me. One of the articles that I posted, actually 2 of them, have been collaborative efforts that I have with Joanna, and we've been collaborating for the past 10 years, and really very, very productively and successfully. And once you find such a collaborator, it's and you grow from each other and from the interaction, then it's just continuously producing new ideas and new projects. And then you write a grant proposal together, and then it doesn't get funded, but then the idea is still there. So then you write a different grant proposal, and then maybe that does get funded. And then somebody comes to me and says, I want to work with you about this. Okay, let's say we now have a collaboration with the Smithsonian Institution. So they came to me and said, we are interested in an idea. And I said, well, for this, I must collaborate with Joanna, because that's, where my thinking is, so much better. And it's the ideas that we developed that because of them, they came to us was, developed in collaboration with Joanna. It's not mine on my own. So it's eventually that's been my experience. At least I can imagine it's not the experience of other people, but to me, my researcher scholarly identity is intertwined with that of my collaborators. And I think it's the best way to be a scholar. And you can ask Joanna to tell the other side of this.
Joanna, do you want some rebuttal time? No, just a thumbs up. She's with you. How do you start then? I think maybe that's it. You've given us some great benefits and how it works for you. How would you say, and Dr. Kaplan, I'll just start with you because I'll go back the other way. How would you start a dialogue with someone about collaborating with them? How would you bring it up, or how would you start the process, you think? Especially not if you're you, who have this great reputation, but if you're us, who doesn't?
So I think that building on this idea that a collaboration creates a whole that is bigger than the sum of its parts. It's actually, you won't be surprised that if I say that I think about it as a complex system, right? The dynamic system that is continuously emerging. But the idea is that when you come and you say, okay, let's say that I see Bradley and he looks intriguing to me and interesting, and I read something that he wrote, and I think that I would like to collaborate with him, then when I think about approaching him to say, to try to entice him to collaborate with me, I need to present myself both as how I'm going to grow from interacting with him, but also what I'm bringing so that he will perceive it as he's going to grow from our collaboration. That's true about ideas, and it's true about all the other scholarly resources, for example, time. So how are we going to, match time, bring our times together so that it's bigger than the sum of the time that we have on our own. So thinking ahead of time, like how can I present it and interact with Bradley so that we both perceive that our goals are aligned, while being also mindful and empathetic to where Bradley is in his career, what are his current goals, what his needs are, what his constraints are. So the interaction is should be done with mutual empathy and sensitivity to see it. And sometimes you start such an interaction and it becomes clear that that's not the time. Or that the other person, you start interaction with the other person is not mutual in their sensitivity to you. So all these are aspects that you need to be sensitive to and see, do I want to continue with this collaboration? Do I want to pursue it? Or should we take a hold now? Or is it the time to really engage in it? And maybe then you say, well, doesn't look like now is the right time to really push through full force, but maybe we can read something, meet again, and talk about our emerging ideas in the summer. So it's an emergent process. It doesn't happen exactly the same every time. It needs to be sensitive to the participants and to the environment and the constraints of the environment. And so go dynamically about it.
Dr. Bergey, what do you think?
I agree with everything Avi just said. I think as I'm thinking about most of my collaborations, they occurred pretty organically and bottom up, more so than a goal-directed process of, okay, I want to collaborate with this scholar, and here's how I'm going to do it. And actually, the time that I'm thinking of in my mind that I did try to do that, it actually didn't bear any fruit. So I guess two things. One, I think, is to be what we were chatting about networking at the beginning while we were waiting to begin. And networking is huge in laying groundwork for opportunities that will come your way that you probably won't expect, or at least that was with my case. And so just as an example, two examples, I'm a co-PI on 2 NSF grants right now, and they came through unexpected channels where suddenly there was an opportunity, and I was somebody helped somebody reach out to me and said, hey, Bradley's a person who might be a good fit for this project. And then it was me looking at that project and thinking about, okay, is this an opportunity that fits with what I want to be doing? Can I kind of think about how this project serves, my research agenda? So I think one way to think about it is to be open, network as much as you can in all of the opportunities that you have as you're going through doctoral programs and postdocs, and then stay open to the opportunities that come to you. The other thing I think is my experience is that you have to have lots of irons in the fire too. I think I've as many collaborations that have led to publications, there are probably at least half as many that didn't lead to all the way through the process because something ended up, somebody decided they didn't have a new job or they can't work on it anymore. It becomes nobody's leading the project and there's no champion for it anymore. So I think having lots of collaborations that are serving your interests, and some of them will bear fruit and some of them won't, is another way to kind of find some collaborations that are really productive.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Robinson, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what's been said already, especially, you know, a lot of my collaborative experiences have been kind of organic. They kind of just appeared or were already there, and I kind of jumped on during my doctoral studies, right? Like my advisor already had ongoing collaborations and then formed new ones. A lot of those would start when like she would go give a talk and then people would approach her and say, oh, what you're doing is really cool. Can we team up with you? And sometimes she would initiate that and then I would get to be a part of it. And sometimes she would say, you know, Kristy, will you work on developing this collaboration and see what we can make of it? Like, let's see if we can make a grant together or something like that. And those have been formed really nice foundations for, you know, like building on that. Like some of those people that I got to work with during graduate school from like College of Engineering or, you know, chemistry folks, like that was so helpful to see how my advisor navigated that and to then kind of grow to be more of an increasingly equal part of that team to where I could take on a helpful role and really learn and contribute. And I tried to kind of follow that guide, you know, in my own work. But I feel like some of those collaborations came about, like it would be a fellow grad student. And that's like, to me, that's one of the most magical and fun ways to do a collaborative research together is to say, hey, you know, a person who's at the same stage as me, or hey, a person who's a couple of years ahead of me, why don't we do a paper together? Let's dream something up. And I mean, my very first paper that I got to first author was, you know, kind people in my lab space who were more advanced than me. We had an idea and they said, you know what, I think you can lead this. And they helped me every step of the way to, you know, get the methods under my belt to figure out how to even write a paper, right? So, and then, you know, I know Patrick's in here somewhere. He always is one to think of a good idea and say, hey, we should do this paper. And that's been one of the really fun things is as early career and grad student folks to dream up papers and exercise our independence, you know, exercise our developing skills and see what we can do. And in fact, I remember Patrick started grad school the year after me, and he in his first semester was like, I'm going to do an APA paper, and he pitched it with another grad student who was also a first year, and I was like, whoa, that's awesome, and they did it. So that's really inspiring. I think a good example, right, to just see what you can get away with and see what you can propose. My strategy for my current like collaboration with these STEM profs, I cold emailed them, which I don't necessarily know was like the best strategy all the time, but I arrived at McGill and I was like, I need collaborators. I would love to work with people who care about teaching. So I looked up faculty members I tried to find faculty members who had reputations for good teaching. And I emailed like 5 or 6 thinking maybe one would respond. And all of them responded and were enthusiastic and excited about this work. And so it's like, it was kind of surprisingly wonderful that I've been able to get to know, you know, what they care about and what's exciting to them, what questions are exciting to them. Let's see. So that's like maybe the side of like going after it and making it happen, right? Like reaching out to grad students or cold emailing people and seeing, do they want to work with you? But on the other side, I think if you are just doing good work and going to conferences or just figuring out how to get it out there, get out the word about what you can do, then I think people will see that and people who are also interested in those things will want to work with you. So some of the collaborations I've done have been like, oh, I started out as a stats consultant because I had a particular method that they needed. And then those have just continued from there because we found we just like each other and we like working together, and it's been really fruitful and fun, which I think is one of the best benefits of collaboration is it makes your job happier and funner and something to look forward to. So yeah, those are, I think, most of the ways that kind of collaborations have come my way or that I've tried to create them.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for that insight. So we've been asking kind of like how to collaborate, how to start collaborations. Now we're going to kind of move some questions into like you've all mentioned, like maybe setting boundaries on collaborations, or who's leading the project, or what are some of the, maybe what some of the wisdom you have, or some of the, how do you have those hard conversations about time and who's doing that? What are some ways you navigate that might say, maybe save us some pain or some mistakes in the future? And please jump in, whoever's ready.
I'll take offer initial thoughts. I had been told that at the beginning of a collaboration, you need to sit down and decide who's doing what and who's writing what papers, and kind of stake territory, or maybe that's how I interpreted it. And I found that that's not what I've typically done, because it feels it sets the tone of the collaboration and off in some way. Like, I think collaborations are relational at their foundation, and so you really are, especially if it's someone who you don't know very well, and you're starting this relationship, this professional relationship. There's a lot of like feeling out of the other person. How do they work? What are their interests? What, you know, and I think letting the kind of project kind of evolve, but having regular conversations about what your interests are and what you'd like to do. And I've never run into a collaboration where it's like, no, well, I said I was going to do this and you can't touch that because that's my bit. Like, that's not the nature of the collaborations that I've been a part of. I'm sure there are horror stories out there, but I think having a clear idea of what you're trying to get out of the project, and in my experience, I mean, if it's grant funded, then the rules are kind of laid out more formally. And if it's not grant funded, if it's something that's just kind of emerging out of interest and you're collecting data collectively, then I think the kind of focus of who's asking what questions and that kind of happens again rather organically. So I think having open conversations and communication with your collaborators throughout leads to an understanding of who's going to be doing what. I also think that in my experience, outside of like grant funded projects where there's like a clear structure of who's doing what, collaborators the collaborations that I've had usually have like a champion, right? Like somebody's leading the charge and the other person is playing more or less kind of a supportive role. And maybe those are kind of, there's two sub projects and somebody's leading on one and the other person's supporting and the other person's leading on another and the other person's supporting. That kind of is established as the collaboration evolves. So yeah, those are initial thoughts.
Great, thank you.
I think that there's some middle ground between having an expectations conversations that is a little rigid and the relational piece. I think that it can be done in a relational way, and I think that it should be done. When you start a collaboration, there's figuring it out, but there should be a conversation about, like, so tell me, how do you work, right? Like what and what are your constraints right now? What time do you have? Like what availability to do and expertise, and what are you interested in doing in this project? So I think that such a conversation is important to do in a way that is open, not in a way that is, okay, let's mark territory, but rather let's see how we learn about each other so that we don't expect, like the expectations are not disappointed, but rather we continue to learn about each other as things unfold, and also understand that this is an emergent process and that circumstances change and life happens, and keeping it, as Bradley emphasized, keeping it open and being sensitive to each other is the way to do this. And through that, you might also find that, after a little while, that the patterns don't fit. So I had collaborations where, in the middle we decided, okay, we need to change this because this is not working. So let's decide on a different way of doing this. And like one collaboration that I had with two other scholars early on, we decided, okay, this is not going to work out because of time, because of patterns of life, circumstances, to do it together. So what we decided to do is we said, okay, here's one research question, here's a second research question, here's a third research question. Each person takes lead on one, the other becomes supportive roles by definition. We had 3 papers out of this with all 3 authors in different order. But this was after conversation because the way to do it together, all 3 of them did not materialize. And in other situations, I had collaborations where after the products were done, I said, okay, I'm not interested in collaborating with this person anymore. And kept friendly, but when approached, said, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I can't dedicate time to this now. And that was a decision because the relational piece actually didn't work. But in many other ways, like Bradley is saying, it is, okay, let's be open. Let's talk about what are my goals now? What are my needs? What are my interests? What am I bringing here? And then let's hear from you. And then together build this pattern of work. And it's like a design-based research. Try it out, see how it worked, continue with this, or pivot or change or modify.
Yeah, so kind of adding on to, like, I'm learning a lot here actually, just listening to Avi and Bradley too. But I think the nightmare, right, is that you'll start a collaboration with someone and you'll be on the hook for a deliverable and like they'll just really let you down, or you'll really let them down. Like that's the nightmare, right? So I think that theme of just carving out roles and managing people's expectations for what everyone's responsible for is probably the biggest challenge, right, of collaboration. So I guess like ways that that's been handled kind of successfully in my past experiences maybe is just starting small with those collaborations first, right? Like I'm usually brought on to do some like well-defined task first, like can you run this analysis? And then if I do that successfully, then we can we can see if we like hanging out with each other, spending time with each other and collaborating together, right? So just like taking a baby step. And that reminds me too of something I meant to say earlier about like starting a collaboration. I feel like it's such a great strategy to like think up an idea yourself and then have give someone the really discrete part of that project that you would really like them to do. Like if you know they have a certain substantive or methodological expertise, I think it's easy for them to say, yeah, like, you could say, I anticipate it might take 10 to 20 hours of work and you would get a paper out of it, or, tell them what they could get out of it. That's a really great way to like ease into a collaboration, is like do a discrete thing together, get that product done, and then you can see if you want to expand that a little bit. But I think the main way that I've encountered challenges in collaborative research is like trial and error. Like one of the challenges I think as like an earlier career person or even a grad student, right, is learning how to manage or lead a project from various positions, right? If you're like a student who's first authoring someone and you've got faculty members, more advanced graduate students, and maybe also like undergraduates or less advanced graduate students working with you, like you're trying to kind of manage a team, but you are also, you're working with people who are in positions of authority over you and who are really, really busy. Nobody's going to care about your project more than you, though, if you're first author. So I think that's really a good skill set to develop, is to figure out, okay, like I really want so-and-so to give me feedback on my paper in a timely manner. What are the messages I can put in place? Like, what is it that they need to really be incentivized or to really want to help me with this to get it to move forward, right? Because a co-author who doesn't give you timely feedback or who doesn't deliver their stuff on time can really hold you up for a long time, right? So figuring out how to get everybody on board with your timeline or everybody on board with your needs from them, I think is always an ongoing process and can be a struggle. So I think that advice about keeping it an open discussion and saying, oh, hey, at the beginning, we all agreed kind of to these broad roles on the team. Can we readjust, or, what can we do about the timeline? I think those are important conversations to have, and to have that already kind of initial conversation can set the stage for that later, so you can revisit and say, well, hey, you said you would do this and I said I would do that, but maybe we can renegotiate that a little bit.
I want to emphasize what Kristy said about the different positionalities within a collaborative team and the power structures, and particularly for graduate students who are in a collaborative project, or early career people who join in a collaborative project. Right now, I'm part of a collaboration, and Joey Eisman here is part of that collaboration. We are 10 people in the collaboration. And part of so when it's a big group, I mean, there needs to be some attention to everybody's role and everybody's positionality, and our PIs are amazing. And what they are doing, it's like they are both maintaining a really relational atmosphere, and they're pretty structured in, we need to talk about this. How are we dividing the roles? Okay, we're marking 4 projects. Who wants to work on each project? What role are taking, like who's going to lead this project? So it creating a more structured conversation about expectations, about role division, about marking timelines, all in a very humorous, in a sensitive, in realistic manner. And that's been going really well. And part of what we also did is, by request of these PIs and conversations we had in the team, we're developing materials. How do we have a conversation about authorship, for example? What are the guidelines? And how do we divide roles in a particular project? We have writing project, data collection project aspects, data analysis aspects, teacher professional development aspects. So all of these things are roles that are part of this collaboration, and everybody's contributing with their expertise and roles. And once you map this out, it also becomes clear that it cannot be done without everybody. So and therefore everybody is on everybody's products, right? Because this is group effort.
Yeah, and just to really briefly chime in about, like you brought up that collaborative atmosphere, like that kind, caring atmosphere. I think that goes such a long way to ameliorating everything else. Like if you've made deposit after deposit, not only in terms of like you've worked really hard and you've gone the extra mile to really help with the project over and over, and you've invested in the relationship, you know, that then can really help when difficult stuff comes up. Like if you need to drop the ball for a second, or someone else needs to drop the ball, you can be really forgiving with a collaborator who needs to step back or who needs to let you down sometimes. If you've got all these past deposits of like, oh, I know they're a really solid, great person and they're just having a rough patch, or I know that they do really great work, so it's okay, we can stick it out through this rough patch, right? So I think taking time to invest in the relationships, even aside from the work, is important. And then also taking time to really show and really demonstrate that you're committed to the project, sometimes in an over-the-top way. Some of my like ride or die best collaborators that I will never want to give up are people who are like so committed and so supportive in ways that I thought was like, wow, that's too much, but it's like so appreciated, you know, like you really understand that they're committed, and that's priceless.
Awesome. Hey, so we have a lot of great questions from the graduate students who've come up too. But before we get to those, which are coming next, we had one more prepared question, which is, how's it changed since COVID? Like, what's been different about collaborating since COVID? Is there something we need to think about there, or some wisdom you have for us there? And then I think there's a number of questions about collaborating with kind of outside of academia that the graduate students have asked. I'll go to after that. But just a quick briefly on COVID, and then we'll go to the graduate student questions.
So interestingly, a lot of my collaboration, I moved continents, and a lot of my collaborations pre-COVID were already virtual primarily. Mm-hmm. So that a lot of the infrastructure for me to collaborate were already in place. So, and in fact, one of the funny, so this project that with Joey that I was telling you about, that we have 10 people, it's collaboration between 2 institutions. It's Temple and Penn are collaborating, And it all started, and we wrote a grant proposal together before COVID. We never met in person. Everybody's in Philadelphia, but we never met in person. And then COVID happened, and we still, didn't meet in person. And then once there was a lull, we met in person, and then suddenly we realized that what we didn't know, because we met these people just on Zoom, is that two of our collaborators from Penn, one was 4'8" and the other one was 5'8". It's like, you suddenly meet people, and so Zoom is sort of like a great equalizer in many ways. But we needed to pivot our data collection. The data collection, instead of collecting data in the schools in person, moved online. But that was the operational stuff rather than the collaborative stuff. Collaboration, actually, because things were already happening virtually, not much has changed. At least my experience has been that.
I would say probably just educators and students seem more stressed out, maybe less willing to do research in the first place. So collaborating specifically with like educators and in classrooms, I think that's challenging in a new way. Just maybe like I have less students responding to surveys just because they just don't want to spend any more time in front of the computer than they have to, right? So on that kind of collaboration, I think it's maybe even more important than ever to make sure our research is meeting a need, right, for those collaborators, and rather than like being an extra burden on what they're doing, and that we're really well able to communicate that to them, right, and make sure it actually meets the need and then communicate how it does, which is hard, right, and something I also am still learning to do. But like Avi, a lot of my research was already kind of online, so not too much has changed for me, aside from more Zoom meetings, less in-person meetings.
I would say the same. I mean, the collaborations that I have right now had begun prior to COVID, and COVID has really frustrated the research aims of the projects. So it's made, the team have to think about, okay, well, how do we adapt to the new realities? Do we postpone the start of the data collection? Are we asking a slightly different question now? So it's forced kind of the collaborations to be flexible. But I don't think it's changed like the nature of the collaboration per se. But it's certainly, I echo what you're saying, Kristy, is like we're having a very hard time. Data collection has been really, really hard. One of the projects I'm working on is looking at the effect of adding a back channel in large enrollment in-person STEM courses. And guess what? There have not been large enrollment in-person STEM courses, and the nature of the instruction is changing pretty quickly now in light of having shifted to COVID and instructors and students seeing the usefulness of a Zoom chat room, and now like hybrid options are much more the norm. And so just recruiting faculty situations that still fit the research grant, like that, those are challenges that we're certainly working with because of COVID.
So I guess
Thank you.
To build on this, there has been a change also in the sensitivity to the life circumstances of our collaborators, that, the pandemic impacts our life. So, our collaborators, sometimes get sick, their kids get sick, they have, suddenly the kids are home. So it's the same principle, circumstances change a little bit. So needing to be more flexible, needing to be more understanding. And I mean, I think Joanna wrote this in the chat, that you need to also be kind to yourself, right? So understanding yourself, like how the pandemic affected me, and like, giving yourself some leeway.
Right. Thank you. Actually, what you all just said brought up a point that a number of the graduate students have asked, which is like, how do you collaborate sort of like not just in academia, but what are the rules or the guidelines when you're collaborating with educators or maybe non-government organizations or in industry? How have you collaborated with those kind of outside of academia, and how is it different?
I'll say something really brief on that because my experience is pretty limited. But one is, I think, just in my limited conversations with like industry people or educators, and then my current collaboration with these STEM instructors, I think a lot of your work, like way more than you think, is going to have to be about communicating what it is you do and what it is you want to do, and like what it is they need and want, and trying to figure out a common language for those things, because we're trained in our technical terms and our statistical methods and our qualitative methods, and we aren't always as well trained to clearly communicate what we offer to the public beyond our scholarly spheres. So that's a skill set that I myself really am trying to acquire really quickly, but also I think that's really valuable, is being able to communicate to wide varieties of people and stakeholders and communities. Like if we want to work in that sphere, then we better learn how to communicate really well with them and develop a common language.
I think that, oh, go ahead, Bradley.
No, go ahead.
Just what Kristy emphasized, that it's how the collaborators make meaning of the world, what their needs are, what they find meaningful, and how do you align your goals and process with that, rather than prioritize the research over what's happening in the field. And I think so. Joanna and I are now collaborating with the Smithsonian Institution, and there are so many moving parts there, and different groups that come with their own perspective, and to come to a shared language and understand everybody's discourse and how they construe their role, their identities in that project, and where do these things meet, is the essence of the collaboration. And it's been fascinating and challenging and interesting and growth promoting. I'm learning. I don't know, Joanna, if you want to, I think actually, Joanna, at this particular point, Joanna is a scholar who does partnerships all the time. So you probably have some good insight about this.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in for a few seconds. So most of the work that I do is a collaboration with higher ed and folks outside of higher ed. So I usually am participating or leading teams, some of whom in those teams would be educational psychologists, educational researchers, methodologists. But then outside of that core group, or that piece of that larger group, there are others that are outside of higher ed. They're in K-12 systems, they're in departments of education, they're in museum settings or nonprofit settings. And I actually see that as a huge strength, because the problems that you can tackle as a multidisciplinary team are wonderful. They're rich and complex, and everyone learns from participating in those types of projects. And so I just think I think to move the field forward, whichever field or piece of the field you're in, I found it always to be very valuable to go looking for those collaborations and exploring those collaborations. I put in the chat, like, look for the people who can help you with that adjacent possible, whether that's for a research question you have, or whether it's for a problem you want to solve, and then work with those other people so that you can understand more about what are their problems, right? What are they looking to solve? What are the challenges that they face? And then together, because of your complementary expertise, oftentimes you can come up with a solution that none of you could have come up with on your own. And I think the Smithsonian Project is a good example of that.
Hey, I'm so curious. It's off. What is the Smithsonian Project? Can you give us like a minute or two? What are you doing?
So we're designing an exhibition with the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. It's funded by the NSF. And we are looking at diverse visitors' inventive identity, and how a museum exhibition can actually prompt visitors to engage in identity exploration.
And the collaboration that we have is with the historians and curators, with the professional design firm, with the professional evaluation firm, and us, and of course among the curators there are different perspectives. So many different perspectives and roles and agendas that all coming to debate in creating this vision of what this exhibition that is going to be positioned at the National Museum of American History is going to look like to achieve its goal.
And the
People-
advisory board that's made up of all people from all different walks of life too. So we're kind of in the mix with individuals who know a lot about museums or nothing about museums, a lot about research or nothing about research, right? And so it's just a really incredible growth experience for everybody, I think.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thanks for giving us that little insight. That's awesome. So a couple people too, they've asked questions, speaking of that, like diverse language, that common language, what a great phrase that was, develop a common language, for all of you. But so we have a couple questions around like, well, how do you get a common language around, well, that's my word, like authorship? How do you negotiate that conversation around authorship? How do you negotiate, like if you're spreading yourself too thin, how do you sort of, how do you have that conversation? How do some of those kind of like brass tacks conversations go in your all's experience?
So this conversation needs to be upfront. And I think that like everything else we talked about, the relational piece needs to be guiding this, acknowledging where people are, acknowledging people's needs. There are some, there's some technical guidelines by APA, for example, about authorship, like who, there's even like this little ridiculous form where people get points, for, if you came up with the idea, you get 50 points. If you collected the data, you get 25 points. So they have this list and you can, it's like this quantitative, ridiculous thing about, then you have a formula and then, the formula determines the order of authorship. Instead, so that this checklist can actually be useful in saying, okay, so what are the tasks involved? But the conversation is like, I think as Kristy and Bradley indicated before, like, okay, so who's going to be the leader here? And then what are let's talk about, okay, so the leader, what role are you taking? What tasks are you going to fulfilling? And what tasks are you going to fulfill? And then the conversation is, well, for example, I can say, well, I actually don't have a lot of time, so I'm willing to do this, and therefore I'm, going to take a lower order in the authorship line. Or I can say, actually, I'm already a full professor. Some other people need the publication more than I do, so I'm happily taking a lower role. So it's not like a fixed thing. It is a conversation about how are we expecting things to happen, and therefore what should be the order, and then addressing people's, I actually think that I need to be higher in the order. Let's talk about this. It's not make or break, and it is about the relational and addressing people's circumstances and needs. We in our project, and I'll ask my team if they're willing for me to share this, but we have a general guideline with these principles in mind of how to engage in such conversations. And if they agree, then I will share it with you.
Yeah, I think that, if it's a paper, the first author is going to be the, leader of that discussion and, ask people to kind of mutually agree on the different roles. One thing that I've found really helpful is just knowing that first author can make that ultimate call, right? Like, it can be a little tricky, like you want to make sure, but being really collegial and trying to be generous whenever you can, I think always will pay off in the end, at least in my experience. But what was I going to say? Oh, one thing that I found really helpful was using a task list, like trying to break down whatever the project is, even if it's not a manuscript, it could be like a larger project that's going to lead to several other manuscripts. If you actually list out the concrete tasks that need to be done and assign them to different people and estimate hours on those, that's not always possible, right? It's not always accurate either, but giving a general idea can start to help anyway with that spreading too thin, right? If you're like, well, so-and-so is going to be point person on this part of the project, and here are all the things that they need to be in charge of. Here's our estimate of hours. oh, like they don't have enough hours, so we need to spread it across more people, right? Or vice versa. So, and I think also just knowing your own capacity, right? Like Avi was saying, like, oh, I'm really busy right now, so I'll just do a little bit of the paper. That actually takes a lot of self-knowledge, I think, in scheduling and like time management and like knowledge about how your schedule and your bandwidth works. And everyone probably is pretty different on this. But having a sense for when you can just like keep saying yes to stuff versus when you can say yes, but only a little bit, or when you need to say no. I think that's always an ongoing process to like work out and then to manage all those moving pieces too. But I think especially early on, erring towards saying yes to as much as you can, like when it moves you toward your goals, right, is a really good, is usually a good idea. I'll qualify that, usually a good idea.
I had said that the kind of roles happen organically. I think to clarify that a little bit, I think when a lot of collaborations that lead to, so we've have an initial research question, we've collected some data, but so often the data, don't answer the questions in the ways that you might have all imagined, or you have all these things that have come up and now like shift how you have to think about analyzing the project. And it's at that point, I think, where there's the clearest conversation in my experience about, okay, so how many papers can come out of this data? What are reasonable ways to carve this? And then who would like to take which role? In my experience, everybody is so strapped for time that if you champion something, if you're like, I'm willing to like lead on this, I think you can often find an opportunity to do that. And that there's, I think often, like you were saying, Kristy, lots of people are willing to, I think, in many cases, collaborators are willing to say, yeah, if you can do this, this, and this, I'm happy to like support you. And in the other thing I wanted to add is, in my experience, I have not had so many times where the writing is truly collaborative. Like the project conceptualization is collaborative, the data collection is collaborative, and then in my experience, the first author is often the person who kind of like takes the first push at writing most of it. Maybe some pieces are kind of farmed out to different team members, but for the most part, there's like one kind of person who's doing the heaviest conceptual writing. And then the other collaborators are giving feedback on that. So that often there kind of needs to be a champion of the particular paper within the larger collaboration.
Just a quick follow-up, because one of our members and I asked, like, how do you write collaboratively? How do you write collaboratively? So that was one answer, but are there other ways that is there more collaborative approaches, or is it usually kind of like that?
Yeah, hey Red, I like that question. Thanks for asking that. The process broadly described is my more typical process as well. Like whoever's the first author, like I typically don't like take on a first author role unless I'm pretty willing to do what it takes to get it to the finish line in terms of the writing, right? Like I know that it could happen, that I could be writing every word and then just getting feedback. In an ideal case, I feel like some people are doing some of the writing as well, so it is more shared, but that's not always ideal either, because you want it to flow all nicely. So I think usually it's like the method and results that someone else might write, and then you kind of weave it all together. But I think it depends on who you're writing with. It's been really fun for me to start working with students, right, for whom this is like an earlier paper, like one of their first papers. And so that collaboration can be really great. And I think they can work amongst each other. And I did this myself when I was a grad student. Collaborative writing can be, how do we order the sections? What is the line of logic we need to establish for this rationale for our paper to make sense? And so I have really enjoyed in one-on-ones with students, and this is similar to what I would do in the lab with fellow grad students in grad school, is to talk through paper and talk through the outline together as an act of collaborative writing. And I know I haven't done this myself, but I want to. Live writing together I've tried it in a little baby way, and I'm not yet good at it, but I've heard people do that and it sounds so cool. Like sitting live and actually writing on a shared document together and thinking it through. I think it has a lot of prompts. I don't think I think that way yet. Like I think I have to have a lot of quiet to write. And so I tend to like spending intense focus on it and then sending it off to say, okay, here's my first pass. Can you add in your expertise about whatever it is, out of school programs or whatever, and then we can try to weave it together. But I think it can work a lot of different ways, and it's really, I think it's fun to kind of negotiate what is it that your other person is offering that like maybe I'm not as good at, and then what can I really offer that I think I'm good at.
There are multiple strategies. I've written with other people in very different ways. Sometimes I write first draft, and then my collaborator goes over it and makes suggestions. Sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes we do what Kristy was saying, like we sit. I think Joanna and I do it very often. We sit and we say, okay, how is the paper going to look like? What are we saying here? What are we saying here? What are we saying here? And then one of us takes a shot, or we divide sections, and then we go over each other's sections. A couple of times with a colleague, we wrote together, but it wasn't so much that we sit on the same document and we, somebody writes and the other one writes while they're doing this. But it is like talking, so, okay, let me now take 5 minutes, we all go and do something, and then we come back and we say, okay, so we just wrote this section, let's go over it and see. So yeah, with different people, different kind of projects, different styles, it looks different.
I want to know how much you're writing in 5 minutes, Avi. I need like 5 hours, and I'll come back with like a scrappy paragraph and just offer it up to those who will have it. No, I wanted to add, we were talking about how collaborations are relational. I think editing writing is a rather intimate affair. I think I know, especially like when I first started collaborating with people, like it's one thing to like give feedback to a reviewer where you're anonymous and you can really just say exactly what you think in the service of improving the manuscript. But when it's like a collaborator and you think what has been said here is confusing or is poorly written maybe, or that is a little bit of a sensitive area. I don't know, that's something that I've been trying to learn, and it feels very different on different projects depending on what the power relationships are, in terms of how differential maybe you are, or how comfortable I might say, like, I don't think, I'm not following the narrative here. So I think that's maybe, I don't know if I'd be curious to Kristy or Avi or anybody else in the call, if you have strategies for managing that, but I feel like that's an area where like the relational and the feedback piece are, it's a little bit of a sticky wicket sometimes.
Agreed. I'm sometimes just befuddled by like what a role I should exactly take and how to do the right tone, right, of feedback. Like, should I just jump in and edit? Should I say exactly what I mean, or should I like try to really massage it? I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, maybe Joanna can say how I behave when we write together, and feedback, but I tend to provide a rationale for why I suggest things. But it has been that some people say, I don't want you to do my line editing, just give me structural comments. But very often it's about line editing, and I go and I as one of my collaborators say, use my red pen. And the thing is that with the track changes, it can be a little disconcerting because you move stuff and then they become green, and then you write and they become red, and then suddenly it erases. So the whole thing looks colorful, and then it's not. So I'm trying to maintain some tracking to the changes. So if the person can decide, oh, I'm not accepting this, but maybe I'm not sensitive enough to my collaborators in this, but I go and I say, I think that this is what we need to write. This is how it needs to go. But mind you, I have Joanna edit my writing. My English is not my first language. I have on important papers, I have my spouse edit my writing. She's a professor of English. So it's writing is all, and I edit my own writing. I revise and change sentences and go back and reread, and so I think that the part of the expectations when in collaborating, that writing is an iterative process, that people revise all the time, that people learn from each other all the time, that the fact that I'm suggesting something doesn't mean that I'm demanding that you accept it, but that's my perspective on it. Let's, if you disagree, let's talk about it. Like, why did I think that this is what we should put in? So I think that mindset of writing as an evolving collaborative project, so that feedback needs to be candid, is part of the expectation setting.
I'll just jump in here and say Avi's a fabulous writer, first and foremost. So it's an honor and a pleasure to collaborate and write with him. But I do think that manuscripts and grant proposals need a single voice, a coherent voice. And so when I'm writing with a team, which is more often than not, I very rarely write entirely by myself. We sort of develop this unspoken norm that at the end of that process or throughout that process, the person who's leading that writing project should be going through and making sure that the whole manuscript or the whole grant proposal reads coherently with a single approach and a single voice. As a reviewer, as a past editor, as a reviewer of grant proposals, it's incredibly obvious when a paper has been written by multiple people and nobody's actually gone through for whatever reason and made it read coherently. And then the second thing I would say is that I think everyone brings so many things to collaborations that are in addition to writing. And so just because, this is just my opinion, just because you didn't equitably write the manuscript or equitably write the grant proposal doesn't mean to say that you don't have a seat at the table and you're not incredibly valuable in that collaboration. Maybe you went out and did the background research, maybe you did the needs assessment, maybe you proposed the methodology. You bring, and this is where I think students bring so much to the table, because you often have skills and perspectives that faculty may not. And so the collaboration is more than just who's writing which draft, in my opinion. So.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you all. It's about 8:14, so we're going to kind of wind up here. So we've got kind of one last question for our panelists tonight before we have an interactive sort of closing. So if you had one piece of advice for us on how to start a collaboration, especially if we're new to it, especially if we haven't done much of it, or we're trying to get, maybe we don't have a lab that's kind of going to help us get started. How do we start it? How would you suggest that we kind of go at it? Just a little quick advice as we head out.
Perhaps not very practical, but as like an attitude to adopt, just know that you really do have a lot to offer. Like you're getting great training and you're there for a reason. So even if you're just at the beginning of your training, right, you've got something to offer. And so the more you know what that is and the more you can feel confident about it, like I think that kind of shines through in how you interact with people and how you say yes to opportunities. So being willing to say yes and really knowing what you have to offer, knowing that you're a highly qualified person. And then the second piece of that, of course, is to really take every opportunity to expand your tool belt and to really develop your methodological and your substantive expertise, and get out there and do that work so people know what it is you do and then want to invite you on, right? So be confident, look out for those opportunities, and then take those opportunities for collaboration and then for training toward collaboration too.
think if you can find, if you really want to collaborate with someone, then I think the question is like, why do you want to collaborate with that person? What are they doing for you? And if you can find, I think if you can have an attractive collaboration for somebody else, you're likely to find somebody who's willing. So if you have data that you've collected and you have an idea how you want to analyze it, but you don't have that analytics skill for a particular analysis or something, and you know somebody who does, and say, hey, I have this data, I think it would fit how you've analyzed something in the past. Would you be willing to collaborate with me on this project? And you would be a co-author on it, and you make the pitch. In that case, then what the person is really contributing is their expertise, but it's not a large project in which they're collecting data, and it's like a year-long thing. So I think if you can have something to share with somebody else, and it fits what you're seeking expertise, that's kind of fits with the data that you have in hand, that I think is often like a lowers barriers for kind of initial collaboration, rather than, hey, you want to go out and collect some data and see how it goes. That's a much more riskier and longer term endeavor.
I would recommend that, particularly for graduate students, collaborate with each other. You are your own best peer, right? And then what you can do is then you can go and look for a mentor who'd say, we are collaborating, would you mentor us in this collaboration? Like, you give us feedback, or can, because we feel not completely sure about what we're doing, and then we will seek your advice. So then a mentor doesn't need to be a full collaborator. They can be a mentor, but you collaborate with each other. That's what happened with me and my fellow graduate students, and we're continuing to collaborate until 2-3 decades after. And in that, I would like to say that the dissertation itself doesn't need to be like yes, you are writing your dissertation, but the research can be collaborative. So you are writing a dissertation, and then there's a student who's just following you in your first step. They're about to propose, maybe they're a second year and you are a third or fourth year. Bring them in, have share analysis with them, and then when you write the paper, dissertation, your name will appear. You can thank them in the acknowledgement, but in the paper that you write, they can be co-authors, and that can start a long-term collaboration. So don't think about research as a collaborative endeavor, and break down the mindset that, researchers are sitting in their study and typing on their own. That's not how research is done.
That's all super good feedback. So I think we're going to squeeze one more question at least, because it's been such good thoughts. What we haven't asked yet though is how do you end a collaboration? Like, if it's not going well, you got to move on. What are your strategies for that part of the process? Maybe especially again, if many of us on the call here are not are not going to have the more power in the relationship. So how could that work, or how might that? What are the strategies you have for that?
Well, sometimes collaborations end, as Bradley was saying, like organically. A grant ends, and then the work can continue, or people get busy with other things. So you wrote the papers that you committed to, and you say, okay, I don't want to collaborate with these people anymore, and then it can end naturally. I think it's legitimate to say to collaborators, well, my circumstances have changed, and I am now unable to continue with this. Let's think about how I transition out in a way that doesn't undermine the project. There are polite ways and in the relational context to indicate that this is not a fit anymore. Disappearing and not responding to emails should not be the option.
I agree. I mean, some of the collaborations that I've had kind of end at the end of a project, and it's like a natural transition. I don't know if I'm the only one here, but projects also kind of just fizzled out, or there was 8 potential papers and 3 of them got written, and then like there's no longer anybody who's willing to champion any of the remaining pieces, and it's like, well, maybe there's a grad student someday and whatever, and it just becomes kind of like the friend that you call less and less frequently, and maybe there's a reason to rekindle it, and sometimes there is, and then sometimes there's not. So I don't know that that's advice, because that doesn't seem like the proper way to end a collaboration, but sometimes in my experience that is kind of how they end. It's just like there's no longer enough collaborative energy to keep the project going.
Yeah, not much to add on my part. I don't think I've ever like ended a collaboration on my own. I think it's just fizzled out or just ended organically, and either you don't have the opportunity or you just don't kind of want to keep collaborating. But yeah, I'm still very early career, so my experience is limited.
Of course, another option is to leave the country. That's also like a well, with virtual collaboration, that's not
right.
anymore.
I left the US and it didn't really work, so
This has been great. Thanks a bunch. I think now, so I'm going to ask, speaking of collaboration, other folks have been mine in the chat better than I have. What questions have I missed? Who have I not seen whose question got skipped or something like that? I'd love for somebody from the community to join in, because I don't want to miss anybody before we head out. Who we not gotten?
Quick question, if that's fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like if we don't get enough exposure during PhD like for collaboration, it's mostly like we just work with the advisor or like probably one other person in the lab or something like that. How do we change that mindset when we actually like complete the PhD and looking for like other positions and working with collaborators then, or like,
I think that if you finish your PhD and there was no context for you to work with peers, collaborate with peers, or you're coming into a new, relatively related but new field or professional group, and you want to find collaborators, which is, understandably very challenging. And refers back to the networking we talked about earlier in conferences, and with COVID, it's been difficult. I think that in these situations, you might want to be ready to assume a heavier load in a collaboration, in an initial collaboration, and say to come to somebody that you want to collaborate with and say something like, I have data, I have research question, I think that I would really gain from your expertise. Would you support me here? I will do the bulk of the work, but I would like to consult with you. I would like to send you stuff for feedback, and then we will author this together. And that would be, so in thinking about how are you sensitive to other people who don't know you, who you want them to start to get to know you, and how you are matching their goals and they can contribute to your goals, that an initial step like this, you should be willing to do a little bit of a heavier lift in initiating this. And once that happens, they can develop trust, they can see your work ethic, they can see how they learn and from you, and then the next project can be more mutual or more equitable. I mean, that's something that a strategy that might work.
Thanks. That's great.
All right, it's about 8:25. I know we want to end at 8:30 to respect anybody's time. Is there one more quick question I missed? Is there anybody else who's got one more we can answer quickly before we kind of go to the closing, or are we at a good place?
I think there's a question by Ishwar. How better to feel like we have.
That was just a follow-up to his thought that he was sharing. Yeah.
I had a quick question. It's sort of related, but I was wondering about like how collaborations like come up whenever you're like going up for promotion, just more as more of like a technical, like what's the incentive? And it like, is that something that's looked at whenever, you know, they're deciding on your promotions, and like, you know, how many collaborations seem like a good number? You know, I guess those are sort of my like technical, like what are the incentives of collaboration other than just the benefits of like a more well-rounded research question being answered?
Great question, Ian, and very strategic one. Like thinking very practically, right? I think it really depends on what your org values, right? Like some departments and colleges and stuff really value interdisciplinary work and collaboration, and some might also or instead value like more individual, like put your own stamp on things. So you have to find out what it is the org really values the most. In my experience, the collaborations have been really generous in that, like coming in as a new faculty member to McGill, I've had more advanced faculty members say, oh, hey, I'm writing this grant. It's going to be an easy lift for you and I'm going to put you on the grant. And that shows, like, immediately gets stuff on my CV and allows me to get to know people because I'm collaborating with them on the grant and with other scholars who are on their team. So they're immediately sharing their networks and sharing their financial resources and then sharing their you know, like logistical knowledge, I guess, with me. So that is a huge benefit, right? And very strategically like works for me really well. And then at the same time, like while I'm benefiting from that, I need to be developing kind of my own like things that I lead. So I've tried to kind of do a mix. So I have like a couple of projects that are like a more advanced faculty member has invited me on, and I like it's super generous. Some that I am kind of trying to lead in a more independent way, like they're smaller grants or smaller papers or smaller projects. And then some that I have as like lateral partnerships with people at a similar career phase. But I try not to spread it, like having too many projects for me is really hard to manage. So I try to keep them all under like a similar umbrella. So they're kind of answering a larger order, like similar question, and then they're just smaller pieces of the puzzle. That's like how I'm managing it so far, but that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's kind of in line with what my department and my university kind of expects of me and wants me to do. Like I know what grants I'm supposed to get before tenure, and I know what kinds of things they're looking for, and they're not gonna, like, they're not too worried about the balance of like different types of collaborations, if that makes sense. So just trying to cobble together the resources, I guess, and cobble together whatever's going to lead to my CV looking like it needs to look in a couple of years when I go up.
Nice.
I think it's a good question to ask in an interview, is how is collaborative work viewed and appreciated in this department? To get a sense of how, I mean, I know that most of my work is collaborative, and some of the pushback or some of the feedback I've received as I've been like going through pre-tenure reviews is like, oh, you should really have a sole authored piece here, or like, why don't you have more solo authored work? And so I feel like, if anything, I've had to make the case for why I work collaboratively and why that's important and why that's who I want to be as a scholar. But sometimes there is like non-collaborative work that I've just had to carve out in order to satisfy what I know is an expectation for some people who are looking at my tenure case.
In Division 15, one of the initiatives that we have is we're going to develop materials for department chairs who are writing letters for promotion and tenure, where the division will write division endorsed document that specifies the values that the division has about research, and collaboration is going to be in there. So collaboration, community engaged research, so that when educational psychology departments, write for promotion, some of their a member, they can say, here's what the field of educational psychology values. It's not going to be a panacea for everybody, because some departments, some colleges and universities have traditional views, but we hope that it will help. What Kristy and Bradley said about finding out in an interview and the expectations is extremely important. And another norm is, Bradley emphasized that, working with your mentor is your advisor is a collaboration. Don't give it up, but you need to go also beyond that, or in addition to other collaborations. So don't only continue to write with your advisor, although definitely continue to write with your advisor. Like, why break up this relationship, right? But even there, different places have different expectations. So like, I heard that there's actually a university where, or college where the faculty member got the advice, like, don't write with your advisor anymore, which I think is like, it's ridiculous, right? But be mindful of that, and because part of what you want to, they expect you to demonstrate is independent thinking. Again, like a sort of like a ridiculous term, but initiative, that that you're able to manage a project, to lead a project and write, definitely be first author on projects, on grants, on papers. So have more than one collaboration is usually a good idea. And there are strategies of writing single authored also products from a collaborative project with the agreement of the team, if that's what's expected in the context. So that's also a possibility.
Wow. This was so amazing. Thank you. So many great questions, such great feedback, and such great answers and thoughts. We really, really appreciate your time. Dr. Robinson, Dr. Bergey, Dr. Kaplan, thank you so much. I'm going to quickly plug a few things for the grad school. In case you haven't heard, AERA is coming up. So if you're going to be there in person, the grad school, the grad students have some really wonderful collaborative opportunities. I think there's some stuff in the chat where you can link to it or sign up for it. It's really good stuff. There's going to be a hike, going to be a dinner, some mentor projects, so mentor programming. So for sure, if you're going to be in San Diego or going to attend virtually, some of them are open to virtual participation. Look at some of that stuff in the chat now as soon as you can. And we have one of these coming up next month, May 9th, Trends in Methodologies in Ed Psych. So if you like this, we'd love to have you back to that one so we could learn some more together. We'd appreciate that. I think, unless somebody tells me I missed something big, that's it for tonight. Did I miss anything big? We good? All right.
You're good. Thank you, Jeff. We'll put the
Awesome.
links in the chat for the graduate student stuff, but then otherwise, if people aren't waiting around for that, feel free to leave. But thank you all to our panelists and Jeff and Preeti for organizing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good luck, everybody.
Have a good night,
Thanks
everybody.
for
Thanks so
the
much.
invitation.
Bye.
Great to meet
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Take
Thanks
care.
for having me.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.